Now, both of these, Peter Rabbit, there's a bird on your head, they're both very fine children's books. The bird on your head, there's a bird on your head uses short sentences and a simple vocabulary. The average length of the word in the story is less than 5 letters. It repeats key words. Bird or birds and head are both used 17 times in the story. Cute pictures aid in telling the story, but the story itself makes little sense without the pictures. The pictures also help young readers guess what's written in the book. Peter Rabbit uses a more varied vocabulary, including words like accident, mischief, umbrella, current, parsley, cucumber, excitement, imploring, trembling, wheelbarrow, and fortnight. The average length of a word is closer to 6 letters, and there's little repetition of words. Pictures illustrate the story, but the story can stand alone without the pictures. Now, I don't want to disparage either book, but for the purposes of teaching reading, it's important to have students read more complicated texts. In that regard, Peter Rabbit is a superior story. So, why do I say a story like Peter Rabbit is better for teaching reading than a story like There's a Bird on Your Head? To understand this, one must be clear on what reading is and on the different methods to teach reading. There are 2 main methods to teach reading, sight words and phonics. Often teachers blend the two, though I'm adamant that phonics is the way to teach reading. Rudolph Flesch, in Why Johnny Can't Read, put it this way: if you don't teach a child the letters, he'll always be stumped when he sees a new word. However, teaching words by sight has been used for a long time. Books designed for use when teaching sight words use a simplified vocabulary, pictures as aids to guessing words, and repeated vocabulary. Again, this is not new. Some of the best-loved children's books, like The Cat in the Hat, were designed to be used with this method. The nice thing, though, is that a child taught to read with phonics can still read and enjoy these books. My daughter is a 2nd grader, and when she was in 1st grade, she already knew how to read. I had taught her to read with phonics. One of the first books that she could read all by herself was There's a Bird on Your Head, and she loved it. Okay, she would read it over and over. A 1st grader taught to read by sight can read There's a Bird on Your Head. But a 1st grader that is taught to read by sight will have no chance of reading Peter Rabbit because he hasn't really been taught to read. He's just memorized some words. A student that is taught phonics can read words that he's never seen before. Acclaimed teacher John Taylor Gatto put it this way in The Underground History of American Education: good reading is the fluent and effortless tracking of the symbol sound code. And Why Johnny Can't Read, Rudolph Flesch emphasized that memorizing words is not the same thing as reading. Memorizing or guessing the meaning of whole words is not reading. On the contrary, it is an acquired bad habit that stands in the way of your child's ever learning to read properly. So, why should early readers be challenged to read more complicated texts like Peter Rabbit? When they do, they'll inevitably come across words that they haven't read before. This is the perfect time to practice phonics. A student taught to read by this method can sound out unfamiliar words. This is the essence of reading. Besides getting to practice reading, students will also increase their vocabulary. Learning new words at an early age is the key to understanding complex text later. Now, today, people present this as what they call the science of reading, and they act like it's new. All the science of reading says is teach the kid to read with phonics so he can sound out the words, teach him new vocabulary so he knows what they mean, and get him new experiences so he can relate to them when he gets there. That's all the science of reading really is, and we've known this for at least since the time of Rudolph Flesch, and that's going back 50 years, and we've probably known it for longer than that. Besides getting practice reading, students will also increase their vocabulary. Again, that is important. So while reading's not understanding, reading can lead to understanding, and learning new words helps do that. Words have meaning. So in this video, I've emphasized having students read more complicated texts, and I've focused on early grades. But this really applies to all grades. If a student's taught to read phonetically, Calling unknown words will not be a problem. Any book with age-appropriate content should be open to such a reader. A fourth grader can read Harry Potter or Treasure Island or the BFG or The Hobbit. Be sure to teach your students to read phonetically. If you have students that are struggling to read, take the time to go back and teach them phonics systematically, with no special symbols or jargon. And challenge your students to read more complicated texts. They'll learn more and they'll be more interested in their reading. There's a bird on my head. Piggy! Is something on my head? Yes. There's a bird on your head. There's a bird on my head. Ah! Is there a bird on my head now? No. Now, there are two birds on your head. What are two birds doing on my head? They are in love. The birds on my head are in love? They are lovebirds. Lovebirds? How do you know they're lovebirds? They are making a nest. Two birds are making a nest on my head? Why would two birds make a nest on my head? I'm afraid to ask. Do I have an egg on my head? One, two, three. You have 3 eggs on your head. I do not want 3 eggs on my head. Then I have good news. The eggs are gone. The eggs are hatching. Hatching! The eggs on my head are hatching. Cheep, cheep, cheep. They have hatched. Now I have 3 baby chicks on my head and 2 birds and a nest. I do not want 3 baby chicks, 2 birds, and a nest on my head. Where do you want them? Somewhere else. Why not ask them to go somewhere else? Ask them. Ask them. Okay, I will try asking. Excuse me, birds. Will you please go somewhere else? No problem. It worked. Bye. Now, there are no birds on my head. Thank you, Piggy. Thank you very much. You're welcome. Okay, so the book has about 250 words, less than 5 letters per word. Lots of words are repeated. The most obvious are bird or birds and head, which are both repeated 17 times. Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. I'll show you a few less pictures here and do a little more reading, but I will show some pictures as well. Once upon a time, there were 4 little bunnies, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning. There, the rabbit underneath the tree. "You may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put in the pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went to the woods to the baker's. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First he ate some lettuces and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes, and then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. So there's the mom telling him where to go. But round the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. He lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster, so that I think he might have got away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. So here's Mr. McGregor by the cucumber frame. Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him, and rushed into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it had not had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. So here's the sieve going on Peter, and here's the water can. He began to turn them over, carefully looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Curdy-shoo!" Mr. McGregor was after him in no time and tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out of a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to his work. After a time, Peter began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old field mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she could not answer. She only shook her head at him. So Peter's lost and upset by the door, and he can't get out. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, but now and then the tip of her tail twitched, as if it were alive. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. So there's the cat and the goldfish. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out and climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quickly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter did not care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running till he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice, soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some chamomile tea, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for their supper. And this one's got a cool little pop-up with the bunnies in it at the end. So that book, Peter Rabbit, had 950 words, 5,170 characters, an average of about 5.4 letters per word. Also, if you'll notice, it used many distinct words.